Welcome to the Great Basin Fire Potential Outlook for July through October 2018. First, looking at our winter precipitation since last October through the present time, you can see we've had well below normal precipitation this water year over all of Utah, Arizona, into the southern and eastern half of Nevada. We have continued with above normal precipitation over the last several months across central Idaho into Wyoming, and then we've had periods of wetter and drier conditions over parts of northern and western Nevada. If we look at the difference in water year from this past water year to the one previous, obviously the winter of 2016 into 2017 was very wet, and we saw some record conditions over the northern half and western half of the Great Basin, where again we had that well above normal precipitation. Further south, we even saw near normal precipitation in most locations. However, this past water year has been drastically different, with well below normal precipitation again over that southern half of the Great Basin, and even in some of our wetter areas was a far cry from what we saw the previous winter. Therefore, we did have all the fine fuel grass growth that we saw from the winter of 2016 into 2017, and then due to the drier winter we've been seeing, we have a lot of carryover fuels from that, obviously continuing over the northern half of Nevada into northern Utah and parts of southern Idaho. So now we'll move on to the drought monitor. All this precipitation recently has affected the drought conditions across the Great Basin. We have seen extreme to exceptional drought return to the southern and eastern half of Utah into parts of the Arizona Strip, with moderate drought over southern and eastern Nevada. Elsewhere across the Great Basin, even with some precipitation we've seen abnormally dry conditions return to the northern half of Nevada into southern Idaho. And if we look at the outlook through the end of September, we're looking for that drought to continue or intensify over the western portion of Utah into southern and eastern Nevada and down into the Arizona Strip. And we may see the drought improve over the eastern half of Utah once the precipitation from the monsoon finally starts later this month. Looking at temperatures, we'll go back again to May, and we did see above normal temperatures or near to above normal temperatures really across the Great Basin. But the bigger story was after a dry winter and then a moderate start to the spring, we saw a very wet May, especially towards the latter half of the month, where some of this wetness really lingered for longer durations, which really lowered our fire potential throughout May and allowed for another 1 to 2 crops of cheatgrass to start growing. So we have the carryover from last year along with at least 1 to 2 new crops of cheatgrass, especially over western and northern Nevada, into parts of northwest Utah and southern Idaho. Now if we look over the last 30 days throughout the month of June, we again saw those warm temperatures, especially over the southern half of the Great Basin, where temperatures were over 4 to 6 degrees above normal. Precipitation, however, took a giant turn, and we went to well below normal precipitation, with some areas not seeing any precipitation through much of June, especially over the southern 2/3 of the Great Basin across Utah, the Arizona Strip, and Nevada. Still, storm systems continued to target northern areas, bringing near to above normal precipitation across Idaho and Wyoming, keeping fire potential lower in those areas. Now, if we look at how this has affected our fuel conditions, the latest fuel runs show that the 10-hour fuel moistures, which is more representative of our grasses, is very dry with this recent return to warm and dry weather, especially across Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip. Namely, Utah is where our fuels are most critical in the south and east, where fuel moistures are in the lowest category. Looking at 100-hour fuel moistures, which tend to correlate fairly well with large fires across the Great Basin, are below 5% over much of Nevada and Utah, and again still a little bit higher further north. Looking at 1,000-hour fuel moistures, which is more representative of the timber areas, very dry conditions over much of eastern and southern Utah into the Arizona Strip, southern and eastern Nevada. So it's really these areas, especially where we have our larger fuels that are very dry, that are most concerning in the short term. Now looking at our picture of our point ERCs, and you can see that the ERCs over the eastern, central, and southern half of Utah into the Arizona Strip are above the 97th percentile in most areas, and further west and north into northern Utah and eastern Nevada, we are seeing fuel moisture, or ERC rather, in the 80th to 90th percentile. One thing of note is that these ERCs are well above normal for the time of year across Utah, which we'll see in the next slide. Looking at the graphs of ERCs, you can see over southern and eastern Utah, the top and middle graphs, the ERCs are not only well above normal, but in many areas of southern and eastern Utah have hit or are near historical maximums for the time of year. And we will see hotter conditions continue through the early part of July, so these ERCs will continue to go up. Looking at eastern Nevada, again we're seeing those same conditions in the top map. You can see ERCs well above normal and even approaching or near the 97th percentile. Looking at sagebrush fuel moisture, some of our recent samples, first over western Nevada, the sagebrush did peak about a month ago and has been steadily going downward and is now below normal and has reached some critical thresholds over parts of western Nevada below 125%. Up into Idaho, the sagebrush has peaked but is trending right around normal and is continuing to go down. Over Utah, the sagebrush fuel moisture peaked quite a while ago and has dropped extremely rapidly and are near record lows in parts of southern and eastern Utah. Now we've looked at some of our past and current conditions, we'll look at where do we go from here and what are we expecting for the next few months. First, the 6 to 10 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center, which goes out through July 10th, shows above normal temperatures across the Great Basin and generally near normal to below normal precipitation, with the exception of far southeast Utah. And really, the monsoon moisture will begin over parts of the southwest as we go through the next couple of weeks, but largely any of that moisture will likely not make it up into the Great Basin, at least for the next week, if not longer. Therefore, we're going to continue these very warm and dry conditions, which will allow our fuel moistures to continue to drop and become more critical, especially across Utah and Nevada. Now we'll look at La Nina and El Nino, kind of where we are now and where we're expecting it to go and how that might influence our weather. Looking at this animation shows our sea surface temperature anomalies in the equatorial Pacific, which is really showing us how our sea surface temperatures relate to normal. So anywhere where you see blue colors are below normal temperatures, and anywhere you see the orange or reds are above normal temperatures. We'll be focusing on this area right off the South American coast, which is what tells us what state of ENSO we are in. Currently we're in a state of neutral, and you can kind of see these colors fluctuating from blue to orange with some near normal or the white colors in the middle as well. So we are in neutral ENSO conditions, and we will talk about what we're expecting over the next several months in the next slide. Now looking at this slide, similar to the last animation, any area in white is really ENSO neutral, any area in red is indicating El Nino, and any area in blue is indicating those below normal sea surface temperatures and La Nina. So right now we're in a state of neutral, and as you can see from the graph, most of these lines are gradually going up, and it looks like later this year we may transition into either more of a weak El Nino pattern or remain neutral. It doesn't look like we're seeing any models that take us into the La Nina pattern. So what really that means for this fire season is more variable conditions similar to what we've seen. However, also with these temperatures near normal in the equatorial Pacific, it doesn't usually allow for an enhanced tropical storm or hurricane season over the eastern Pacific. So that may limit the amount of moisture we actually see coming up into the Great Basin as we go through the summer months. Now we'll start looking at some of the projections for temperature and precipitation over the next couple of months. First, throughout the month of July, from the Climate Prediction Center, still showing above normal temperatures over much of the southern half of the Great Basin. And then as we get later in the month, that potential for precipitation to increase over the eastern half of the Great Basin. However, it looks like right now, at least for the first 2 weeks in July, we're really not going to see this wet signature helping out any of our situation over Utah or the Arizona Strip, but possibly later in the month as we get past the middle of July, we may start to see a little bit more moisture move in to Utah for some thunderstorms, which may eventually bring some wetting rains. If we look at the 3-month outlook, which takes us from August through October, still very warm signatures for temperatures over much of the west, and that above normal precipitation signature, which really encompasses much of the monsoon as we go through August, over Utah, possibly eastern Nevada, but really much of Idaho and western and northern Nevada remain on the drier side as we go later this summer. Therefore, initially our main concerns will likely be Utah as we continue through the month of July, but as we move later in the summer and towards the fall, our concerns for higher fire potential will linger into Idaho and Nevada. So now we'll put all the pieces together and reveal our outlook for the next 4 months. So for July, we are still looking for those above normal fire potential areas across really all of Utah, into the Arizona Strip, and parts of the higher elevations of southern Nevada. Again, this is where our ERCs are most critical. Fuel moistures are the lowest, not only in some of our dead fuel moistures, but also in our live fuel moistures as well. So initially, really Utah, Arizona Strip, and southern Nevada and the high elevations are going to be our main concern. As we move later in July, from mid to late July, especially as we continue to see grasses continue to cure and sagebrush live fuel moisture continue to dry out, we will start to see above normal fire potential return and continue to increase through July over western northern Nevada, up into northern Utah and southern Idaho. As we move into August, we are expecting those monsoon rains to finally take hold over parts of Utah, so we will return to normal conditions there. However, we'll continue the above normal fire potential where we have a lot of our carryover and new grass growth over northern, western Nevada, northern Utah, and Idaho as we go into August, especially as all these fuels will be available to burn. We also might start seeing that above normal fire potential pick up in the higher terrain of Idaho. By September, we may see most of these areas return to normal just due to time of year, and also that monsoon moisture should remain somewhat active over Utah throughout August and eastern Idaho, which should minimize that threat eventually by September as well. However, over some of the western sides of the Great Basin, which will be on the drier side likely of any moisture, especially with the grass growth continuing to be a factor over western northern Nevada, as we see some of those drier cold fronts move in, we'll likely see that higher fire potential continue into the early part of the fall. October, everything returns to normal across the Great Basin unless we have continued warm weather, which would stretch into October, but right now that's fairly uncertain. That concludes our webcast. Check back next month for the latest updates.